Chapter 17, Mission minus 24 hours. As always, George was the first one up and sat on the rear of the Land Rover while drinking a hot cup of tea.
Morning. The water has boiled if you want your usual gallon of coffee in the morning.
Cheers, mate. You been up long?
About 30 minutes or so. Simon's gone to the woods for a dump.
Far too much info this time in the morning. Grabbed myself some boiling water from the vessel, poured it into my metal mug along with a splash of milk from the armored cow and made a brew, and went to join George. Shift up. I took a seat on the back of the tailboard. There's a lot to do today, so when his lordship comes back, George, I'll get some scran going. Breakfast was not going to be anything fancy, just sausage, bacon and eggs all fried together in the same pan on the embers of a fire someone had already started.
You will make a good housewife one day, Steve. Sorry, houseperson. Wouldn't want to upset some fucker.
Thanks, George, but you know what you can do.
Yep, grab some plates.
Come and get it then. Remember I cook so one of you two can clean up the mess.
That went down well, Steve. How did you know my favorite was burnt sausages and smashed fried eggs? How was yours, Simon?
Food is food, mate. Better we start cleaning up, George, before Grumpy over there starts on one.
Once breakfast was out of the way, the plan of action this morning: ensure that all kit was packed, first parade check on the vehicle, then make a strategy of how we were going to recce our way to the back of the vineyard. Once back from that, we had to go over tomorrow in detail, especially if we were going to get this pulled off with all three of us getting the mission done without a scratch. Bring over the map, let's check today's route. Placing it on the tailboard, Simon orientated it to the land. From our position, we were about 1 kilometer from the coast, which could be reached by the track that meanders its way through thick forest until it came to the coastline. From that point, it would be a straightforward matter of following the shoreline until we reached the boathouse that protruded out into the sea from Henry's property. This would be the first real obstacle on the route, due to not knowing if any guards or anybody else had located themselves there. On the plus side, this would provide us with the perfect opportunity to peek inside to find out if there was, in fact, a boat housed here and what condition it was in. May need it as a backup strategy for leaving, even if it's the only way for us to reach the inlet where Derek would be waiting for us if everything goes to plan. Got any ideas, anyone, of how we do today's recce? Followed by a couple of minutes of silence, as all three of us mulled it over in our minds.
Let us take the Land Rover to the coast, conceal it someplace while all three of us make our way along the shoreline.
Sounds like an idea, gents. Simon, if you sort out the vehicle while we disassemble the camp. As always, it wasn't just a job of putting out the fire. The whole area needed to be checked for any accidental dropping of paper or food. This still made me think back to my time as a young soldier and still learning. Caught trying to bury my rubbish rather than lug it about for several days. The section commander at the time, instead of ripping me a new arsehole, took time to explain that so much can be learned from what people couldn't be bothered to carry back with them, like numbers and morale, etc. Due to the terrain, this was going to be slower than anticipated, as Simon skillfully maneuvered along the track, which didn't leave much room to drive with the thick undergrowth. Coming so close to the trail you were able to reach out and touch it. Rounded a tight bend and started to head down a steep incline, to be faced with a small stream crossing our path.
Didn't spot that on the map. You think you can drive across, Simon?
That depends, George.
On what?
Are you getting off your fat arse and going to investigate how deep the water is and whether the ground underwater is hard enough? Would do it myself, but I'm driving, and Steve is navigating.
No problem. Unlike you two pussies, I'm not afraid of a little water.
George broke off a branch from a nearby tree, to use to keep his balance and test the hardness of the ground, tentatively inching his way in the cold running water, which now came just above his knees, making his way to the other side of the stream, tapping with the stick as he went.
All good to go, mate. I'll wait for you on this side of the river.
Selecting four-wheel drive, drove the Land Rover at a speed which was neither too slow, which might result in the vehicle becoming stuck as it sank into the riverbed, nor too fast, which would cause the water to enter too high in the engine compartment, resulting in an electrical short circuit. Think you've maybe done that before, Simon?
Once or twice. Somewhat different in a tank, as you wouldn't even stop. The only person who would find themselves getting a complete soaking would be the driver, if the idiot kept the hatch open. Perks of being the commander.
The track continued to wind its way through the trees for about another 600 meters before it finally came to the shoreline. Took no time at all to find a suitable location to conceal the Land Rover among the undergrowth. Grabbed our kit and made our way to the edge of the tree line overlooking the shore. The warm, clear waters of the Caribbean Sea were lapping at the shore about 150 meters away from where we stood. A distinctive row of seaweed stretched along the sandy beach around 60 meters from the breaking waves, a sure indication that the tide was out. From our perspective, there were 90 meters from the seaweed and the tree line. If we were spotted by anyone at sea and came towards us, they would need to cross 90 meters of open killing ground. The easiest way would be to walk along the beach to the boathouse and beyond. We couldn't afford to leave a nice set of footprints in the sand that even a person with half a brain cell would be able to follow. No, we would have to use the tree line. This would make the going a little slower but provide some cover from view. A quick check of the time, 9 o'clock, which meant if we want a closer observation of the dogs and their handlers, we had around 1.5 hours to reach a spot we might be able to observe them.
You two ready? Good. Let us go.
I led off in our usual formation with me leading, Simon following me, and George taking up the rear. At first, staying inside the tree line, the going was easy, made reasonably good time covering the first kilometer in around 30 minutes at this rate, should arrive at the boathouse in plenty of time for a quick investigation. Located where the stream crossed earlier, emptied into the sea, which now presented us with a little open ground of our own. On its own, this shouldn't be an issue, but about 200 meters out at sea was a small boat, softly bobbing up and down in the ocean. Through the binoculars, the shape of two figures fishing could be clearly seen, one of which was facing the shore. Making my way carefully so as not to risk being seen or heard to the edge, I crouched down behind a bulky green bush, and placed my hand on top of my head seen by Simon and George. They were on my position within seconds.
If you go across first, George, followed by Simon. Once you are both over, I will cross and proceed to pass you. Take up your normal positions.
Like to mix our routine in crossing obstacles to confuse anyone who was watching us. While one observed the direction we had come, the other kept an eye on the two fishermen still bobbing up and down on the crystal blue waters of the sea. Soon my turn to cross a quick check behind me. The coast was clear, so entered the stream. The water at this point may have only come up just above your shins, but you always got that sinking sensation as the water started to enter via the tops of your boots. You knew that for the near future, you would have cold, wet feet. As I passed George, a voice went,
Now you know how I feel.
Crossing the stream had cost us a little time, so now needed to open the pace to reach the objective in time. The time was now 9:50, which gave us 15 minutes to check inside where the boat was kept without being seen. Fortunately, going on the second part was as easy as the first, reaching the area in no time. The boathouse was in the natural break in the forest at the end of a 50-meter-long wooden pier standing almost 1 meter high. The structure was constructed out of shiplap timber. At a guess would say it was about 10 meters long by 6 meters wide and stood on concrete pillars buried into the sand, giving it a height of around 3 meters and painted bright red. From its position, a boat would be able to launch at any time. Didn't need to rely on the tide being right level. Needed to take a look inside to what type of craft was being stored, if any. Between us and the pier was 70 meters of open ground that we would need to clear. Additionally, at the end of the pier an area of around 100 square meters had been prepared and well maintained, from the look of the short length of the grass. A complete contrast to the rough vegetation of the forest. At the far end, you could distinguish where the path from the house broke through. No words were required here as we'd done this type of thing hundreds of times. George adopted a prone firing position close to a bush at the edge of the clearing, aiming the rifle at the break in the trees at the far end of the grassed lawn while I covered the boathouse. After taking a deep breath, Simon sprinted across the 70 meters before finding cover under the pier, in a place where covering fire can be given if required. Next up was me, a final check to ensure the coast was clear before making a dash towards the safety of the boathouse. Must have been about halfway across when I stumbled and fell face down in the soft, wet sand. Shit! I lay motionless, listening and watching for any movement and feeling like a real prat. From where I was, the stupid grin on Simon's face was visible. I'm not going to live this one down. Picked myself up and continued to run the rest of the distance to underneath the boathouse. From here, I would cover down the beach as George raced across to join us. The floor above me was made of wooden planks with a small gap between each one, possibly to allow water to drip down from the boat when it had returned from the sea or after washing off the seawater. What was strange, still couldn't spot any sort of ramp to launch the vessel. Maybe this will become clear once inside. No sounds were coming from within, plus no sight of anyone through the cracks between the planks. Time to investigate. The plan was simple. George would stay outside to provide cover if anybody showed up, while Simon and myself would take a peek at the interior. Looks like we had only one way in, and that was via the small door from the pier. This would make us exposed from people coming from the direction of the house, so as little time on entry would be paramount. Giving the thumbs up signal to Simon, we jumped up and took positions on either side of the door. Grabbing the door handle, I gradually pressed it down and pushed the door. I guess we weren't expected, that's why they hadn't locked the door. Waited 20 seconds once the door was opened before we both rushed inside. Situated in the center of the floor and taking up the majority of the available space was a gray ridged inflatable complete with 2 Honda Orca 15 horsepower outboard motors. That should do us if we need it. Was now clear why I couldn't spot a ramp for launching the boat. At the far end was a hydraulic ramp which guessing would be lowered once the 2 large barn doors were opened. An assortment of spare boat parts lay on a makeshift bench. Several jerry cans were lined up in a row along one side, under life jackets that were hanging down from hooks on the wall. On the opposite side was a set of stairs leading up to some type of loft, about to start going up when Simon grabbed my arm while raising one finger to his mouth. Both stood motionless, daring even not to breathe for a few seconds, when the sound of someone moving on a higher floor could be heard. Whispering into his ear,
"When I say we rush upstairs, I'll lead. Try to detain who is up there without firing a shot."
Simon gave me the thumbs up to indicate he understood. The loft was a small space with hardly any headroom. Ropes and old anchors lay across the floor. In the far corner, behind an old metal locker, we managed to perceive the shape of a person doing his best to blend into the background. Both dashed to grab him. The man mustn't be expecting anyone as he was unarmed. Wasn't long before I held him in a headlock. The man thrashed about, trying to claw at my face. Only one thing for it, as I hurled him to the floor. Bringing down the full force of my body, I soon had him pinned down on the ground, while Simon prevented his legs, kicking frantically as he tried to free himself. We were now faced with a dilemma. We couldn't tie him up because when someone came looking for him, and they would, Hadley and the rest will know someone is up to no good. And I'm positive he's no fool and will soon realize it was us. Sam would have bound to have said something. Couldn't risk the noise of a bullet or even the large blood splatter if we slit his throat. Was only one thing for it. Placed my arm around the front of his neck in a similar fashion I'd used on the man on St. Bethany and strangled him. Wasn't long before his lifeless body lay on the floor. Couldn't leave his body here to be discovered. We had to dispose of it where it couldn't be found.
"Pass me the rope and a few of them anchors, Simon." Once we had sufficiently attached several heavyweights to the lifeless body with the ropes, we carried him downstairs. There was only one thing for it. Would need to throw his body into the water channel used when they launched the boat. With any luck, the water level will stay high as he sinks to the bottom. Better hurry up if we are going to get to target on time. Once outside, gave George a tap on the shoulder.
What happened inside?
"We'll tell you later, mate."
Still had 500 meters to go until we reached a position where the activities in the vineyard, including the daily walk for the hounds, might be watched, if there was indeed such a place. The primary objective was still to check if a viable location to launch could be found, plus a route into the warehouse via the rear door. The time now was 10:25. No way we would arrive in time to monitor the direction the dog handlers took to and from the vineyard. Arrived at the point where the forest ended, and the sandy beach and growing fields merged. A hedgerow had been planted along the perimeter, probably providing shelter for the marijuana plants from the slight breeze blowing in from the ocean. Sand had blown up across the shore and was piled up against the bottom of the hedge, forming a natural sandbank. We'll be able to use this to reach the other side of the vineyard towards the second of the 2 water tanks, which provided a constant water supply. No point in staying there as the position was below the lay of the land and gave no line of sight, so called the boys over to talk about our next move.
Any ideas?
Need to go and investigate if it's possible to enter the warehouse via that back door you mentioned. If you transverse to the water tank, George can stay here ready to cover our withdrawal, as he will not be coming this way when it's time to take out the bad guys.
Sound like you have a plan, Simon, so I will go along with the plan.
Good to me too.
Okay, we meet back here in exactly 1 hour from now.
Observed as Simon headed for the warehouse and George was in position before crouching as low as possible behind the bank, but still, in a way, I would be able to cover the ground quickly without being seen. With any luck, the people working will be too absorbed in what they were doing to even bother looking towards the ocean. Reached the corner in no time, now just a short distance until I arrived at the water tanks. Unlike the other tank on the far side, I didn't spot any guards here. The reservoir stood on iron girders which stretched across a walled structure. Inside the base was a water pump which was running with a nearly silent murmur. Perfect, this should cover any noise I made as I scrambled up the ladder on the outside of the tank. Lady Luck was with me today. The top consisted of a 2-foot metal lip which ran the whole circumference. In the center was a loading hatch. By design, this must have been repurposed from a completely different use. Why would a water tank need a protective lid? Maybe they used it for storing wine, hence the rim, not wanting to waste any spillage? Not complaining as it was now giving me excellent protection. From my vantage point, I could identify the dogs running freely among the rows of vines while their handlers walked in a group around the perimeter, stopping only occasionally to speak to the people working on the plants. Took out my notebook and sketched a plan from this view. Made sure I noted down landmarks with approximate distances from both the water tank and the place where George was now concealed. If the guards stuck to their routine of staying together, there shouldn't be an issue taking them all down from here. Then it would be a case of sprinting as fast as my legs would carry me over what I'm estimating would be 200 meters to the grounds of the house. Having covered the short distance, Simon found himself on the back edge of a small metal building. Between it and the warehouse was a 30-meter exposed dash. Peeking around the corner as he crouched close to the floor, nobody was in sight, so he propelled himself across. A scan of the area confirmed that they had not placed CCTV cameras at the back of the store. Which is surprising as Henry had said some lines are priceless. Right, better check the door, which was 6 meters away along the back wall of the warehouse. He hoped it wasn't locked. A simple twist of the door handle established it wasn't. Now for the tricky bit. Needed to find out if it would open and hope and pray no lazy bastard who should be working is looking straight at the door and spot any movement. Not even a little amount. Typical, nobody had been doing maintenance around here. As the door squeaked and groaned as it opened, just enough to confirm it wasn't locked. Closing the door as carefully as he had when opening it, confirmed it was shut properly. Let's hope no one now locked the bloody thing. The thought crossed Simon's mind to leave the door ajar to be safe, but then the vision of the wind blowing the door shut swept, so that idea was shelved. 10 minutes left to arrive back at the RV. Back in the tree line, George looked down at his watch. The other two had better start making a move. They had only 20 minutes before the pre-arranged time. As he did, a man started to walk directly toward his location. The rifle was pulled firmly into the shoulder. His eye looking through the optical sight, he was ready to fire. The approaching man stopped 3 meters short, turned to face a nearby bush, and then the recognizable sound of flowing water. He was having a piss, oblivious to the fact 3 meters away from him, a gun was pointing right at his head. There was a rustling of leaves and broken twigs coming from the forest. These were no ordinary noises, but that of a person deliberately moving with caution to his left again. He was ready to fire when he saw it was Simon. Looking to his right, he managed to see me approaching along the hedgerow towards the RV. Is everyone okay? If so, let's make a move back to the Land Rover. Taking the same route back as the way we came, we paused for a few minutes near the boathouse to ensure no unwanted people were looking for their mate. Good job we did. Two men emerged from inside and proceeded to walk along the pier before jumping down and looking underneath, calling out, "Paco." This must be the man we dispatched earlier. About to make plans on dealing with the situation when the two men walked off in the direction of the house. Left it for a few more minutes to ensure nobody else was in the area before crossing. The Land Rover was only a couple of 100 meters away. We had no intention of making a stupid rookie mistake by walking straight over to where we had concealed it. This would be a three-point pincer movement. We would all approach from different angles, stopping short and standing off and observing. I would be the bait as Simon and George covered me from a safe distance, rifles at the ready. Took my time and slowly moved into the location, prepared for any nasty surprises. On reaching the vehicle, checked around for any signs of tampering, which might indicate it had been found and could be some type of trap waiting. Gave the all-clear signal to the others, who then, ensuring they still followed the same procedure, joined me at the Land Rover.
That went well, boys. How about we set up camp here for the night? I'll put out a few booby traps out just in case if one of you two fancy putting a brew on.
Grabbed 2 of the homemade claymores and some wire and headed off to the track that brought us here early this morning. Found the perfect place towards the bottom of a tree and placed the device, ensuring the wire ran the full length across about a meter from the floor. On this route, I would be expecting vehicles rather than people. Walking back in the direction of the beach, I laid the second claymore. By the time I got back, Simon had already made the brew and was lighting a small fire. I take it we were all hungry. There were still several hours before nightfall, so limited chance of it attracting attention. But to be safe, he was building a fire inside a hole he'd dug in the ground.
From tomorrow, boys, we will either be running, talking, or shooting, so there'll be no time for eating. So might as well use up what's left of the rations. I'll bung them all in the same pot.
Yummy, my favorite army check-in.
Says George, walking over to join Simon at the fire. The fire had burnt down to glowing embers before Simon put the pan on.
That should take about 30 minutes or so.
Once we've eaten, we need to start making plans for the assault tomorrow.
No problem, as you like your coffee. Here is another one for you. Just make sure you don't trip on the way over.
Knew the moment my face got implanted into the sand that you two bastards would never let me hear the last of it. Simon and George started to laugh with stupid grins. Always good to relieve tension after a hard day's mission, so joined in laughing at my own expense.
Scran's ready, boys, come and get it. There you go, one huge dollop of chuck-in.
Got a wine list, waiter?
Now let me see, we have a vintage bottle of sparkling or still corporation pop, or maybe sir would like a glass of Kiss My Arse, a rare vintage.
Let me think, I'll stick with the sparkling. No, make that still water with ground coffee beans. Once the scran was completed, everything was put away, and the fire doused. We were ready to move at a moment's notice.